Hello again. Here we are arriving at Christmas time, and a Christmas which would have been almost unthinkable this time last year. This new variant of the virus, which seems to be passing more easily from person to person than the older variant, has meant a tightening of restrictions just when the arrival on stream of the first vaccine had been giving us hope of a way out of this health crisis. That hope is still there, of course, it just looks like it will be a bit harder to get from where we are now. And we were promised 5 days to be allowed to mix with people over Christmas with a relaxation of the restrictions, and that's been reduced to just Christmas Day itself. And I sense a feeling of great disappointment, even among people who understand why the decision has changed. We had been promised something different. However much some people protested at the time that the 5-day decision, the 5-day period, was dangerous, we were promised it. And to have it taken away hurts. And that's before we consider the fact that lots and lots of people have had to change their plans for Christmas. Of course, we always knew this was possible, but somehow it might not have felt so bad had we not made the plans in the first place. Some people cannot now travel because it would be too far for just a single day, and some cannot travel because of new Tier 4 restrictions. And now we here among the churches where I work, we find ourselves heading into Tier 4 as well on Boxing Day. We've already had little taste of what that means for church life, with the preacher who was coming to the church next to the manse here unable to come and lead worship last Sunday because he happens to live just over the border into what is already in Tier 4. For lots of us, Christmas is not happening with the normal people. Some of us are joining in with people we normally might not join with, but it's much more common, I think, for people not to be able to join with those they would love to spend their Christmas with. This year, when I came to read the Christmas stories in the Bible, something jumped out at me. Something often does. And this year it was about who was there. Who was there? The Christmas stories are familiar to us from hearing them read year after year and seeing them acted out in countless nativities. But the fact that the nativities are so well known from primary school onwards maybe means that sometimes we overlook what the biblical text actually says. For example, this year I came across someone who tried to find a text which mentioned the donkey Mary rode on to Bethlehem, you know the one, the little donkey on the dusty road. But it's not there. There is no such text. There's no mention of a donkey in the biblical story. Now, there may well have been a donkey. It's just that the text of the Bible doesn't include it. So sometimes it's surprising to notice precisely what the text of the Bible does say or doesn't say. And what struck me this year was who was there. We have this image from our nativities and our Christmas cards of Joseph and Mary and the baby, the three of them in the stable, and then the shepherds arrive from the fields. Luke chapter 1 verses 16 to 18 says this: "So the shepherds went with haste and found Mary and Joseph and the child lying in the manger. When they saw this, they made known what had been told them about this child, and all who heard it were amazed at what the shepherds told them." Contrast that with the visit of the wise men, noting, of course, that the Bible doesn't tell us how many of them there were, only how many types of gift. Matthew chapter 2 verses 10 to 11 says, "When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh." So the shepherds told their story, and all who heard it were amazed. Presumably not just both Joseph and Mary, but more people to make all who heard it. There may well have been more people around than we think. But then the wise men come and find the child with Mary his mother. Joseph's popped to the shops or something. So some of the Christmas story could have had quite a lot of people milling around, perhaps most likely some of the local women helping Mary with the birth. and some of the Christmas story was pretty much solitary. Presumably in the moment before the wise men arrived, it was just Mary and the young Jesus there. Even the Christmas story can change for us year by year as we see more in it. Sometimes I've wondered about when it might have happened, sometimes about where, sometimes about how much of the story goes back to the facts of a birth and how much is actually about ways of writing about such an important birth. And this year, for me, the thing which jumps out is how the people there aren't always necessarily the ones I'd assumed were there. This Christmas there's a lot of that going on. Of course, every year there will be some of us who sit down with the pain of an empty chair. Just as every year there will be some of us who sit down with new young life, and sometimes both. And every year there are people who are not where they would ideally like to be for Christmas. But this year that applies to more of us. Some of us are missing out on the visitors we'd have hoped for. Some of us are missing out on going to see people we'd want to see. And as I say, of course this happens every year, but just perhaps not to the same extent. It's a changed Christmas. And that in itself, for such a strong tradition, can be unsettling. And even the Christmas story can change for us year by year as we see more in it. That's the one thing that saddens me a little about the tradition of nativity plays, that they can lead to the idea that it's a story for primary school. It is a story for primary school, but it can continue to grow with us. Sometimes it can be very unsettling to think about growing from what we learnt in primary school, or Sunday school for that matter. But the story is strong enough to cope. And that story is about the God who is beyond everything, the God who sustains everything, who chooses to dwell in humanity. That means God knows and God understands the strange mixtures of joy and pain that this time of year brings. God knows the empty chair and the baby's first smile. And through all this, God lifts up humanity to share in God's life. That, for me, is the heart of Christmas. At least it is this year. I'm taking a break next week, so you get a break from me too. God bless. See you soon. And happy Christmas.